in fact, that's exactly what has happened. The criminal justice system, to the extent that it's taken lessons from about human rights, has done so mainly through interaction with public health. And so what we'll find is that in some places in Canada and across the world, and not everywhere, what ends up affecting whether charges will proceed against a particular individual will often be interactions and relationships with public health. So for example, somebody who fails to disclose their HIV status could come to the attention of authorities either through the police or by a report made, for example, to public health authorities. In a place like Calgary, where a report does come to public health authorities, what those public health authorities will do is typically start with interventions that might address some of the underlying reasons why it might be difficult to disclose. So to give you another example, a couple of years ago there were charges against a downtown east side Vancouver sex worker for failing to disclose her HIV status and having unprotected sex. Now, if you ask a downtown east side sex worker, they'll probably tell you that unprotected sex costs more and is usually at the initiative of the client, right? That is, if you want to have unprotected sex, you have to pay for it. And regardless of that, the criminal law would say, no, well, she failed to disclose, and she agreed to have unprotected sex, and as a consequence, she might be held criminally liable. Of course, there's a broad recognition, both among the police and among public health officials on Vancouver's downtown east side, that this is no way to deal with issues about safe sex on the downtown east side, that there's certainly an evident injustice there. And what ends up happening is that the police say, as is so often the case with so many of the issues that arise in that context, all right, public health, we will defer to your approaches so long as we think that your approaches are fair and are fairly grounded in some of the major human rights concerns that we as police also share and worry about. And so police prosecutors tend not to pursue charges where public health officials are dealing with them fairly. Now, what does it mean to deal with them fairly? Well, those public health officials will often have relationships with the communities that they work with. And those relationships tend to be informed very much by the health and human rights discussion that I referred to earlier. So, so what ends up happening, for example, is that where a complaint is received about someone who's failing to disclose, that person is brought into public health, and public health will sort of look at and address some of those underlying social determinants of their sexual behavior, and will choose to address those before the matter ever gets brought through to the criminal justice system. So what that means is that although we have all of this potential for significant overuse, I would say, of the criminal law, oftentimes that overuse of the criminal law is curbed to a certain extent by this interaction with public health, and by extension, this interaction with communities of people living with HIV who might have a better grounded understanding of what affects people's behavior. The reason why I tell all these stories is in part so that you can understand and appreciate, so we can understand and appreciate why some of these, how the culture, in this particular example, the culture of human rights, is circulated and transmitted in sort of a feedback loop. And it explains some of the importance of why it is, some of the reasons why it's so important that we all come together in rooms like this and engage in this kind of cross-disciplinary analysis. Were it not for this kind of cross-disciplinary analysis, we might have criminal law classrooms in our law school, human rights classes in our law school, people attending both, and yet people failing to necessarily make some of those connections. So it's important that we continue to work here together, because it wouldn't be enough, for example, apply them as they become criminal law practitioners. It's important that those engagements continue throughout their careers. And the nature and directions of some of the lessons that are drawn might surprise us. So, so in conclusion, what I'd like to do is just to draw on some of the things that the other panelists have said here. In particular, the comments about our brains remaining plastic. I think for me that was very heartening, because I did worry that all the lessons that might be drawn would be drawn exclusively, or not exclusively, but much more in the earliest stages of our careers. And I think it's important to recognize that those lessons have to continue to be drawn as we move forward.